My grandmother left me her inheritance, and I set it on fire. My grandmother and I had always been incredibly close. I was a wreck after her funeral and barely heard the lawyer when he called out my name. I was sitting with my family in a tiny room in the back of the funeral home. My grandmother's lawyer had a giant box next to him and was handing out the items my grandmother left each of us in her will. My mom had to tap my shoulder to get my attention, and I went up to the lawyer. He handed me an old photo album that looked like it was older than I was. I smiled, wondering what memories I would find in it, but the happy moment was shattered when my aunt stood up and shouted from the back of the room, "Wait! There's a mistake! That's supposed to be mine!" The lawyer looked at her in surprise. "No, there's no mistake. My client was very specific with her instructions." "That's bull! She promised me I'd have it." My dad then stood up to try to calm my aunt down, but she wasn't having it. They ended up in a screaming match before my aunt turned to me. "You better hand it over. Do you hear me?" My dad saved me from answering by shoving my aunt out into the hall. The rest of us sat in an awkward silence as my aunt and dad continued to yell down the hallway. I hugged the album close to my chest, shocked and confused over my aunt's reaction. I would have let her look through the pictures if she really wanted. Why was she acting like that? The next morning, I woke up early to pack my bags. My grandmother had lived in a separate state, so my parents booked a hotel for us for the weekend of her funeral. We would be going to a remembrance lunch at my cousin's house before heading home, where I was excited to spend time with cousins I didn't see very often. I didn't like the idea of seeing my aunt after what had happened at the will reading. As I stood next to my dad, watching him play Tetris with our luggage in the trunk, I asked him if he thought my aunt would show up. He shook his head. "I have no idea, kiddo. Between you and me, I'm surprised she showed up to the funeral. She and our mother weren't very close." "Then why does she want the photo album so bad?" "No idea. I figured she'd be after your grandmother's jewelry." My dad then picked up my bag, but I stopped him before he shoved it in with the rest. "Wait, can I take the album out first?" I was too tired to look at it last night. We were then driving to my cousin's house, and I sat in the back seat, flipping through the album. It was oddly comforting to see all the old pictures of my grandmother, but the warm feeling was overshadowed by thoughts on why my aunt was acting so weird. Why go crazy over these pictures? It wouldn't take much to make a digital copy for her to have, and the album itself was torn up, so no value there. What gives? I got my answer when I flipped to the next page. Instead of a photo in one of the slots, there was a diamond necklace. I pulled it out, and my jaw dropped. My grandmother had shown me this necklace once before, when she told me that its worth was more than her house and bank accounts combined. So this is why my aunt was trying to get the album? I immediately felt myself seething with anger. My aunt couldn't care less about any of the memories in here. She was probably going to toss them the second she found the necklace. I put the necklace on and hid it under my shirt collar. While at my cousin's, I do my best to ignore the anger still bubbling up inside of me. My aunt was nowhere in sight, and my uncle had started a fire in the fire pit for us to make s'mores, one of my grandmother's favorite traditions. I had brought the album with me and found myself smiling as my family took turns passing it around and telling the stories behind each photo. That was until I heard my mother yell, "What on earth is she doing?" We all turned to see my aunt next to our car, tossing around my family's luggage, throwing clothes out into the street. My aunt then looked up and locked eyes with me. As she stormed her way to the backyard, I picked up the album and hugged it close to my chest. She pointed at me and yelled, "Hand it over!" My dad tried to intervene again, but she slipped past him and grabbed the album. I heard my mom calling the police as my aunt and I played tug of war for the album. In our struggle, the album slipped from our hands and fell straight into the fire. "No!" my aunt screamed as she reached in, horribly burning her hands. My dad and uncle grabbed either arm and dragged her away, while she kicked and screamed, watching the album burn. I waited until she looked at me, as cops pushed her into the back of a cruiser, before pulling out the necklace hidden under my collar.